You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
I say once again, hey y'all, Michael here. Can you believe spooky season is almost over? Of course, I like to think spooky season is never really over. I strive to carry Halloween in my heart the whole year round. This episode was recorded in front of a delightful audience of dear friends at ConGregate in Winston-Salem in July of 2023. We had just the best time at ConGregate, as we always do. It's a fantastic convention run by some of the nicest people in the world. If you want a fandom convention where you can really connect with people and make some amazing friends, ConGregate and RecCon are top of the list. We're hoping to be back at ConGregate next year. And in the meantime, I'm happy to let y'all in on the news. We'll definitely be back at RecCon in Cary, North Carolina, the first weekend in March of 2024. Hope to see y'all there. Before this episode starts, I want to note that our mics are directional, meaning they pick up what they're pointed at and not a lot else. But I've kept what I could from the conversational parts of our recording session. So settle in, grab a bag of those amazing Moravian cookies, and join us at ConGregate 2023 for Reasonable Ghosts and a story that combines Salem's rich history with a fascinating legend. Thanks for listening. And we hope y'all have a happy Halloween.
I feel a little bit silly doing this, but I'm going to say hi. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
And I'm your other co-host, multi-award winning novelist, Michael G. Williams. It's a lot less nerve-wracking for me to say that in a room with fewer people.
Yeah, so this is a live episode being recorded at ConGregate.
ConGregate 2023.
In Winston-Salem.
Yes.
So, the first thing we're going to do here is a fun little bracket, a little elimination game of what I'm calling reasonable ghosts. And you can tell that they're reasonable because I have drawn them with maybe a smirk.
Sensible ghost.
Yeah, but they're reasonable. They're
sensible specter.
Yeah, a sensible specter.
Oh,
Thank
I like
you.
it.
That's
Yeah,
good.
okay.
That's good. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to list some even number of ghosts that we've talked about before, or that you would like to suggest, but you'll be on the hook to give us the backstory of the ghost.
Oh.
And we are going to try to come up with our most reasonable ghost.
Okay.
Reasonable in that we both agree that, yeah, this is probably really a thing.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, it's reasonable as in like how believable, or reasonable about the personality of the...
Yes, reasonable. It's not that they have a reasonable personality.
It's not that they're a mild-mannered ghost.
That's fair. No, it's reasonable in the story. It's reasonable in believability.
Oh, right.
Okay. For whatever your standpoint on ghosts is, we'll do this, and this will come up. Like, is this stone tape theory, residual energy replaying? Yeah. Is this an actual disembodied spirit? Is this a malevolent entity masquerading as a ghost? Whatever. So we'll get into all that in our individual reviews of the ghosts, I'm sure.
There we go.
I would like to propose Dusty, the ghost from the Dunhill Hotel in Charlotte, as a reasonable ghost.
That's a reasonable ghost.
Okay, can we agree that it's a reasonable ghost?
Yes.
Okay.
In part because that's a location that has plenty of reason to be haunted.
Yep.
It has reports from across many generations from people who don't particularly stand to gain anything.
And we will be talking about an update regarding Dusty on our 100th episode.
Yes.
Yes. All right, your turn. Give me a reasonable ghost.
The Gray Man of Polly's Island.
All right.
I feel like it's entirely reasonable that there would be a spirit out there that's associated with storms, because plenty of people die in storms.
You know what's funny? My mother agrees with you.
Really?
Yeah, she listens to the show, and she actually texted me to say, "The Gray Man's real."
Okay, yeah, there we go.
Sorry, Mom. That wasn't meant to be an impression of you.
Hey, guess what? My mother does not listen to this show. I don't think she knows it exists.
I will say, I'm trying to think of which one, because I have to pick one ghost. I can't just pick a site, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The proprietor of the Haunted Mansion in Abbeville.
Okay.
Whose name escapes me at the moment. So I'm just going to write Abbeville Mansion.
Yeah.
Not the Jefferson Davis daughter ghost.
Right.
I'm putting the former proprietor of the mansion as the premier ghost of that
Okay.
establishment.
Yeah. No problem there.
Yeah. Yes. The headliner.
The Pink Lady of Grove Park Inn in Asheville, because there's so many stories of the Pink Lady, again, from across many generations. There are photographs with weird blurry things by the fireplace in the lobby. They do stand to gain something as a business by
More gin
advancing
and
the
tonic
story.
sales with the quinine.
For 100 years, people have reported stuff there. So I like that one.
If you're not getting,
It's also brackets, so I mean, it doesn't necessarily
Yeah,
have to be
right.
the most one. You're not trying to come up with.
yeah, somebody's got to be last place.
Can't stand up, maybe it's not the best.
Yeah.
If you're not getting any of these references on the recording, I would recommend that you go back and find the episode, like the Pink Lady episode. You'll get why I'm going on about gin and tonics and stuff like that.
That's fun history, though.
Yeah, I mean, that episode's an hour long. We're not going to.
Yeah, right. That's an enticement to somebody to listen to that.
Which orb is it? You covered this one, but I really buy into it. It was a guy with the train,
The Mako Light.
and we found the dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many people are we doing?
We just need one more.
Okay. The Mako Light. Yeah, absolutely.
How about the brown metal lights?
That's not a ghost.
Right, but it's okay. I just like the specter. Like is it kind of like a collection of ghosts?
There are people who, that's one of the explanations for it. I personally don't like that explanation because I feel like the story predates all of the explanations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, it could be.
But does it kind of go into a story about how there are lots of stories throughout the ages that kind of predate any kind of game that might come about?
That's true, yeah.
I mean, but you don't necessarily know the explanation of what this could be because everyone's got their own different idea. But
Yeah.
that kind of play into the notion of what causes a ghost to appear. And,
No, I like that. I like that take. Okay, so now I actually like that as an entry, but I don't know.
Well,
But
now we got to find more because I want to put another one on.
okay, you put another one up there.
The Creamery Ghost.
Oh,
I'm going with Creamery Ghost.
Creamery Ghost, yeah.
Creamery Ghost of Downtown Raleigh. I think that was our GalaxyCon.
That was one of the
2022
GalaxyCon stories, yeah.
episode. Yep. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We need one more for the grade 8. Little Red Man. Yeah,
Little
we're
Red
in Winston-Salem. Little Red Man.
Yeah. I was tempted to say Blackbeard just so we'd have one we could all kill.
Blackbeard
So,
is the most unreasonable ghost.
yeah.
All right. So first off, we have Dusty. Hey!
We're doing the bracket of reasonable ghosts.
Reasonable as in most believable. Not reasonable. Not.
Personality question.
Yeah. This is poor on me. You know, this reflects poorly on me. Poor choice of words. Reasonable ghosts. All right.
Sensible spirits.
Sensible spirits. That's what we really should have gone with.
I do love sensible spirits.
First off, we've got Dusty versus Gray Man of Pawleys Island.
Oh, gosh.
So, nickel version of the story. A skeleton was found in the elevator shaft of the Dunhill Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina. Many people during the Great Depression are said to have committed suicide by jumping off the building. Same location. Staff now reports things move. They feel cold air bursts. They've felt the touch on them. Dusty.
The Gray Man of Pawleys Island, nickel version. Every time there's a hurricane, the Gray Man appears. If you see him walking on the beach and he interacts with you, he warns you to leave, or he says hello or whatever. It means go away. There's going to be a storm. If you heed his warning, you're fine. If you don't heed his warning, your house gets destroyed.
Were we able to tie it to an individual at any point?
No, and in fact, I'm going to suggest that the winner of this one is Dusty because the most prevalent explanation of who the Gray Man is post-dates the first experiences that people had with the Gray Man. And so it's clear.
Are ghosts bound to the time-space continuum?
I'm going to vote yes, only for simplicity's sake.
For reasonableness.
For reasonableness. But I feel like
Difficult to measure thing, but in this case, Michael's doing it.
I mean, I've written time travel books and they're complicated. So I say it can't be him, but he's a famous figure that people have attached to the story out of desperation for an explanation.
And
It's not that I find him unreasonable, but we have a person that we know could be Dusty.
yes, we do. Most people attribute the activity to the skeleton. And we're going to get into that. Next up, we have the Abbeville Mansion ghost, proprietor ghost, whose name eludes me right now, and I'm really sorry, whatever it's in the Abbeville episode. The nickel version is there's this big old southern mansion in Abbeville, and it stayed in the family for a very, very long time, and the last lady to have owned it before selling it to a preservation group, local government entity, still haunts it and can be seen like coming down the stairs or in the kitchen and stuff like that. Many people have reported that she's there. Many people report that things will move. It was very important to her. She kept it in the family as long as she possibly could. She made sure that it was going to be preserved and not just sold off. That's the story of the Abbeville Mansion proprietor.
Okay. Pink Lady. Nobody knows who she was, but supposedly she was like the mistress of a powerful person or the daughter of a powerful person or the wife of a powerful person. And in the 1920s at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, she either leapt from a balcony. They have interior balconies over this like big open atrium. And either she leapt from the balcony or she was pushed or she fell by accident. And bottom line, there is a particular room in the Grove Park Inn where people say that they like feel cold spots. Their stuff moves around. They get awakened by somebody talking to them. They get awakened by somebody like messing with their feet, which is a really disturbing part of it. And children report that there's a lady in pink who plays with them in the hallway.
The children do it for me.
Really?
Yeah. Kids wouldn't make that up.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Kids have no preconceived notion. Why would they say that?
I was going to say Abbeville only because there's like a person we know there.
Tiebreaker to the audience.
Do the reports of the children, do y'all know if those have those also kind of go back to the origin of when that started to come about? Or is there a chance that the children have heard the story about the Pink Lady and then get nightmares, possibly?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical.
I vote Pink Lady because so I can do the Pink Lady and Jeff joke again.
All right.
It's good enough.
So Abbeville's out? All right.
The will of the people.
Will of the people. I like the Abbeville one. I like the Abbeville one.
I like the Abbeville one a lot.
But there's also ghosts that may inhabit the house.
Okay.
Which has knocked me off kilter and like trying to support your Pink Lady.
Okay, that's fair.
That's your next sticker. Support your Pink Lady.
Support your Pink Lady.
Support your local Pink Lady. All right, Mako Light. I need to defer to you to this because you gave the story, but I remember being like, oh, that explains it.
Nickel version, a guy realizes that there's about to be a train accident on a long, lonely stretch of railroad between Wilmington and Charlotte. He attempts to alert the train that's going to hit them. In the process, there is the accident. He is killed. His head is severed. It flies off into the swamp and is never found, but his body is. That has always been the story. It's been the story for a very long time. It turned out it is a legit 100% historical story. The guy really existed. The legend version gets his first name wrong, but every other detail is correct.
Seen by a former president.
Well, okay. The legend includes it having been seen by a former president, but history does not necessarily support that.
Okay, whatever. I really like that one. This was my pick. This is my pick, and I'm making you explain it.
No, I understand. I really like the Mako Light, and the Mako Light is one where when I did the research on it, I was like, oh, this is 100% true.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be complete bunk, and then when you did that episode, I was like, oh,
yeah.
I'm a believer.
And I'm going to just note that that's one of our most downloaded episodes of all time, and I think it's because it's a story that turns out to be completely true.
Like the Brown Mountain Lights, which is another Michael episode.
Okay, nickel version. If you stand in the right places on the Blue Ridge Parkway and you look at Brown Mountain, then you see lights rise from the mountain and then disappear, and they're multicolored and they move around. And there are a lot of ghost story explanations that have to do with like wars between the Cherokee and the Catawba, except the Cherokee and the Catawba had versions of explanations for this. The lights go back probably 1,000 years.
There's
like,
video
legit.
of them.
Yeah, there's video of them. There's all kinds of stuff. And people have all sorts of weird paranormal experiences there. And there are like a bunch of versions that are basically true crime stories that just come straight out of Appalachian ballads, but are fictional explanations. But the phenomenon itself is unequivocally real.
Mako Light?
I vote Mako Light because Mako Light is tied to a person. But that's always going to be my baseline.
That's so reasonable of you.
I will point out this, though. Are y'all familiar with the story by Charles Dickens called The Signal Man?
Yeah.
The notion of, like, basically a railroad worker notices something and then has an accident, shows up not just, like, in several places nationally, but also internationally. It's a very similar story. It's somebody who comes in contact with a railroad worker who witnesses basically the concept of the Mako Light constantly, and that comes from the 1800s.
Yeah, it's a genre.
Right.
It is.
So does that mean that it's just a common thing that appears around railroads, or does that mean that because railroads have common accidents, especially in that time period?
Yeah.
Well, because railroads are made out of this certain type of metal that conducts electricity and energy can be.
I would vote Mango lights just for the simple fact that we can't prove that the Brown Mountain lights are ghosts. It could be something else.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that the Brown Mountain Lights is probably chemical in some way, and we just haven't figured out how. But I'm also willing to say that it's supernatural in a way that is not necessarily tied to intelligence. I would love it if the Brown Mountain Lights simply turned out to be basically a thin spot in the borders between worlds. And what we're seeing is something bubble through. That's just me, though.
Rich alien tourist spot there.
Could be. Could be.
Aha, look at the humans standing on a ridge gazing upon us.
They're like, yeah,
They've
there's
been
this place
standing
you
there
go.
for hours waiting for us.
They're like, there's this mountain we go to, and when we stand there, or when we hover over it, we see people collect on this ridge staring at nothing. We don't know what the deal is.
I'm going Mako Light wins that one.
Okay, I do love the Brown Mountain Lights, though.
Creamery Ghost. Creamery Ghost. There was a murder in real life with a real victim near the site of the old creamery building in downtown Raleigh. The victim was found on the premises. A taco store opened once the creamery got rehabbed and immediately started advertising itself as haunted and theming dishes saying it was haunted.
Right.
That taco store also got a spot on a television show where they were trying to drum up business saying, come see our haunted taco shop.
Yeah.
Some people went on television, said some things that they had captured via EVP that turned out to not align with the facts of the crime.
Yeah.
Then the taco shop went out of business. A medium goes to the new establishment and gives this room is clean declaration that nothing is detected.
Supernatural sanitation grade A.
Right. The little certificate on the wall says ghost free 100.
I want to ghost taco.
The border on it is just boo.
So, like, this one's crap. I don't like it, but it is a reasonable ghost in the sense that there was a crime committed nearby.
Nearby is not the same as in that place, though.
Okay, I still think it's a reasonable ghost.
Okay.
For late in the bracket, which brings us to
More reasonable than.
So, Little Red Man, we know his name. Mm-hmm. The Salem Moravians kept meticulous records. We know exactly who he was. We have many reports of him, etc. He's a guy who wore a red cap and was a joker, and he got buried alive and died the next day, and the community was very sad, and then people saw him running around doing like tee stuff.
Mm-hmm. I love the Little Red Man.
I love Little Red Man. And again, that's another story where it's like, oh no, this is 100% true.
It's a simple story too, so it's like, if it's going to appear, like, it's kind of, there you go.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it has elaboration about it. You know,
not a lot of embroidery.
Yeah, and there are a lot of there's a lot of elaboration in some.
There's no tacos involved. I'm giving it to Little Red Man.
Yeah, nobody's trying to sell tacos at the.
Well, it's worse too. Old Salem doesn't make a big deal about it.
Yeah.
For something that they really could just ring out, he really doesn't come up that much.
Yeah.
Creamies don't roll like that.
Yeah.
They roll cookies.
Very thin and delicious. So Creamery Ghost is out?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we've got Dusty versus Pink Lady. I'm going Dusty.
I'm going Dusty because we know the corpse is there. We know that there was a dead body there. We know somebody died tragically under some circumstance.
Mako Light, Little Red Man.
Okay, we know there are contemporary sightings that are documentable, and Life magazine went and got pictures. Mm-hmm. The Wilmington Star News went and got pictures. There are no pictures of the Little Red Man. So I realize that this is not reasonableness. I'm now into believability and have been the entire time.
Yeah,
but
that's really what we're going with.
But I feel like if I were going to pick one as the one I were going to go look for on the basis that I might see something,
yes,
it's going to be Mako Light every time.
I would agree. I could go hunt the Mako light. I can go take pictures of where the little red man should be, but I can't go find the little red man.
Right.
Okay, that brings us down to Dusty versus Mako light. This is heavy.
I know my answer. I don't know that you'll love it.
I'm going Dusty.
I'm going Mako light. For me, when we recorded the Dunhill Hotel, nobody knew who that skeleton was.
And now we do, which we will talk about in our 100th episode.
Yeah. So on the basis of when we recorded it, I would have been like Mako light. And now I could go either way, honestly.
Should we call it a tie?
Let's call it a tie. They can ride off into the darkness together.
Soccer rules.
Dusty caught a train.
Yeah, there we go. Dusty caught a train and he's out of there.
He's riding the rail.
Do you know what this conclusion is?
What?
Reasonable.
Oh my God. Whoa. Whoa. That was amazing. Thank you.
This is why I pay the bucks.
So, while we're on the topic of Old Salem, do you want to hear a fascinating Winston-Salem story?
I do, because that's where we are. And I want you to ruin my good night's sleep.
Okay.
Scare me.
In this one, we're actually going to start with the history, not the legend. Because the legend is informed by the history. So in real history, this is for sure and everything.
Okay.
President George Washington.
Wow. That's pretty big.
That is, in 1791, took a tour of the southern states. He wanted to see remote places that were involved in agriculture and industry and generally see the country. This was his second term in office, if I remember correctly. And he wanted to go basically make nice with everybody and demonstrate his enlightened interest in the good conduct of business.
That completely lines up with everything that I know about his personality from the book Patriots Off Their Pedestals, which you recommended, which...
It's even in my notes.
Okay. Which basically... It's a bunch of firsthand accounts and like records, and it's really awesome. And it talks about George Washington. Like the dude was just like, man, that war was really something. I think I'd like to kick back and chill a little bit now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously a summary, but like, I could definitely see being like, second trip, can I just go see the country? Can I just go be with the people and see how things are going?
And that was...
I made this country. I want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, that was like pretty much the deal. And he was enormously popular. I mean, we don't have a concept of how popular he was. We don't have in our lifetimes a president who has been as popular by any wild stretch. So generally, presidents have to die to get as popular as he was.
All right.
So his whole tour, he took this like long meandering tour where he started out and he like went up into Maryland a little bit, and then he came back down the eastern half of Virginia, the eastern half of North Carolina, the coast of South Carolina, goes across into Georgia, comes back up.
I've got like the Indiana Jones map in my head.
Oh, yeah, totally. That's exactly, yes. And then he comes up through Charlotte. He goes after Charlotte to Salisbury. And then after Salisbury, he goes to Salem.
Okay.
Now, in most places, the only people that like would get to access him in a meaningful way were like the upper crust. Like he would, an example being in Charleston, apparently he spent the entire time being feted, however you want to say it, one party after another, one dinner, one banquet, one speech, etc. after another.
That's a lot of cheese and crackers.
And he really hated that life.
Yeah.
Like he really hated that life. Most of the time, there would be like a big military salute also. He would end up being greeted at the edge of town by the militia for wherever the place was. And then in the middle of the banquet, they would like fire a bunch of cannons and stuff. And then they would like stay up all night firing cannons and partying and things like that. The way it generally went day to day was that he would roll out of town at 4 a.m. with his accompanying militia. He would be escorted to the halfway point or to the big river or the edge of the county or whatever. The bigwigs and local militia of the next place would greet him at that midpoint, and then they would ride with him to the next town. And when he got there, or like along the way rather, he would occasionally stop and ask some farmer, could he feed his horses? Could he get some water? There's an apocryphal story that along the way at one point he stopped at a farmhouse, went up to the door and knocked. Keep in mind, nobody really knew what he looked like. because like there weren't portraits of him in every
There weren't
elementary school
quarters with his
classroom.
face on it in everybody's pocket?
Yeah, exactly. It's like nobody really knew. I mean, like there were drawings and stuff of him in newspapers and things like that, but this is different. It wasn't like seeing the dude walk up to your house. And there's an apocryphal story that he went to one farmhouse and the little girl that answered, he said, "Is your family home?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Where are they?" And she said, "They went to town to see the president, and I'm really mad because they said I had to stay here and take care of stuff. And so I really wish that I were in town to see the president." And he says, "Well, if you make me a cup of coffee, I promise you'll see the president." All right. I love this little story. So part of what I find so interesting about this, like I said, is that people didn't really know what he looked like. And they also didn't know like how he dressed. They didn't know how he acted around regular people.
Sure.
And the answer was that he was very practical, down to earth, very like person of the, like salt of the earth person. Mm-hmm. He was very reasonable.
Is a reasonable George.
He was reasonable George. And like he wore just like homespun clothing. He didn't like wear fancy uniforms or suits or whatever. He in many ways embodied that thing that every modern politician tries to be, which is the person you feel like you could go get a beer with. Like that's the
I love when they do that. Every year on the campaign trail they do that, and every single person looks like they've never held a beer in their life.
Yeah, right. And
you're like,
exactly.
"Oh, I love this beverage. What's this called?"
Right. Michelob? What?
So good.
And so like he would have very few servants or aides with him. He basically had a couple of secretaries and a couple of horses and a carriage that he only rode in if it was raining.
Okay.
And like that was his entourage. There was no 50 cars traveling at 70 miles an hour through the middle of downtown.
Who's going to mess with George Washington?
Right, yeah. He is reputed to have despised politicking.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
He really did not enjoy a lot of the stops on this trip. And Washington was an avid diarist. He kept an extremely detailed diary every day. And he spent a lot of that trip complaining to his diary about how much he hated all these parties. And how
Dear diary, today also sucked. It was the same soft cheese that gets stuck in my teeth, the same dry crackers, and the same jerks just kissing my butt. Where were they when I was crossing the Delaware?
It's not. Other than the "where were they" part, that's not entirely inaccurate.
Okay.
A lot of it was like, I am really tired of this. I would just want to go back to Virginia and do a square dance.
How's my Applejack coming back home? That's what I really want to know. I do hope Martha is staying on top of that.
And he would like go tour Revolutionary War sites and then like diarize criticisms of the two sides and be like, if they just held their ground here, then maybe. And he like would write letters to people about this stuff too. And apparently there was an exchange of letters between him and Thomas Jefferson where he was 15 years after the fact dissing on one of the Revolutionary generals and being like, if he had used the militia as backup instead of, and it's really funny too.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to share an idea that I had that I shared with Michael probably 3 years ago.
Yes.
I want a sitcom called The Founding Daddies. And it's like Golden Girls, except it's all the founding fathers living together in a house. Like
Founding Daddies.
Ben Franklin is just out of control, and
He's clearly the Blanche.
and he's just like party animal, and George is just always just like, oh, Ben's up to it again.
Yeah. No. So as an example of what it was like on Washington's tour, in Salisbury, the night before he got up at 4 a.m. to ride to Salem, they had 15 toasts in his honor. This was not like you take a little sip, you down the glass, and that was the party. People were also very wowed by just how down to earth he was. There are multiple instances of him rolling into town and being like, yeah, I'll shake your hand, shake your hand, shake your hand. Oh, there are kids over there in that park playing. I'm going to go play stick with those kids, or hoop and stick, or whatever they played back then. I'm going to go toss the ball with these kids over there.
I did another 15 toasts tonight.
In Salisbury, he actually was only there for 14, and then somebody else's diary was like, after 14, he retired. And I'm like, wow, no kidding. And the militia in Salisbury traveled with him after Salisbury a lot farther than normal. In fact, as far as I could tell, all the way past Salisbury to Salem, because Salem, being occupied by Moravians, was a town of pacifists. Mm-hmm. Now, During the Revolutionary War, the Moravians were also pacifists. And in their town diary, this is the complete text of what they had to say about the Revolutionary War as it was happening. It does not accord with our character as brethren to mix in such political affairs. We are children of peace. That was that. So they refused to pick sides. And this is a little ironic, given their history as having originally been Europe's most fearsome fighting force.
We cover that in the Little Red Man episode.
Yeah. They were the first people in Europe who became Protestants, and the Pope was like, fine, they can be Protestants because they can kill all of us. So there's that. But 300 years later, they were like, no, we're total pacifists now, to the point that the Tories, who were loyal to the crown during the Revolutionary War, persecuted them very badly. And the patriots who were fighting the revolution persecuted them very badly. And they were like really resented in the aftermath of the war.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. And so when Washington chose Salem as a place to visit,
he's building bridges.
Exactly. He was like making a very conscious political choice to go to this place and say, I'm going to shake their hands too. And he's like so popular.
They're Americans.
Yeah. It's almost a like only Nixon could go to China, quote unquote, kind of moment. And that like Washington was so popular that by visiting the Moravians, he probably did change some hearts and minds around them.
Of course.
So that they would be more accepted. As an example of the political state of things at the time, one of the toasts in Salisbury the night before was for peace between the government and the states. And another of the toasts was for the effective distribution of political thinking by the government to the people. And the next toast after it was the quick distribution of political thinking to the people, because people were actually really worried that things were going to just fall apart immediately.
Well, sure. I mean, we've seen, yes. Yeah.
And like, so when we today look around and think, oh, we've never been more divided, we have always been at least this divided, is the thing that I took from this.
We've always been a little divided.
So as a result of all this context of Washington, the great general and first president, coming to Salem, the Moravians recorded in their diary that they were exceptionally nervous. They were like scared silly of what was going to happen. So history records that his trip was very uneventful. It was very relaxing, he said. He really enjoyed Salem. Moravians in Salem were renowned.
They probably were very different than the types of people that he had been meeting with.
Totally. He like got down off his horse in the middle of Salem Village, and people were like, great, you're going to stay at the tavern. And he played stick in the street with some kids, and everybody was like, you should check into the tavern and try the beer because it's really good. We make it ourselves. And you can try the whiskey. It's really good. We make it ourselves.
The cookies are good. We make them ourselves.
Right. A choral group of Moravians sang while he tried the beer and the whiskey and had dinner in the tavern. And he wrote in his diary that it was like all very pleasant. And he was supposed to leave the next day. And he heard that night that the first governor of North Carolina was coming to Salem to meet him there and wouldn't arrive until the next afternoon. And he was like, darn, I guess I just got to stay in Salem another day. And so he just like hung out in Salem.
It's very pleasant. I'm seeing a lot of parallels. I decided to stay an extra day.
Yeah. Nothing wrong.
Me and George Washington. Look at it. Look at that. Peas in a pod. I'm so humble too.
So I think if any among us embody the principles of the founders of the nation, so it's probably
for the record, that was all sarcasm. Terrible radio.
No, it's going to be really good. But like I said, the Moravians were not exactly teetotalers, and Washington was not exactly afraid to party. And so I think he also just like really enjoyed hanging out with the Moravians, who were just like unpretentious, unpolitical people, down to earth, and wanted to.
My name's George. I like to party.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So on that second day, he recorded in his diary that they took him to a place that was at the time called the Paper Mill Settlement, and it was east of the village of Salem, and it's these days Peters Creek Parkway, basically, if Winston-Salem. There, they showed him their paper mill that they had built, and they also showed him the waterworks that they had built. In 1791, the Moravians in Salem had built a sufficient infrastructure that they had pipes bringing water into every home.
I feel like this is like he made friends, and they're like, dude, you want to see our cool stuff?
This is pretty much exactly it. That's exactly what it was like.
Like at first they were nervous. They were just like, we're going to sing, drink our beer. And then he was like, yeah, you guys are great, man. You want to hang out? They're like, really? Yeah. Oh, dude, you got to come see the stuff we did.
And then like,
come see our pipe.
Right. So in his diary, he's like, these Moravians really have it together. And in their Salem diary, the Moravians are like, the president president really likes us. And it's like this big love fest. It's so funny to me. The legend is, what else did he see on that tour of the paper mill settlement?
Blackbeard?
They had a small pond they had built, and Blackbeard had cut the hands off of half the settlement. No.
Sorry, I was low hanging fruit.
No, that's Blackbeard is always available to be plucked.
Wait. Hold on. What's your legacy?
No.
What's your legacy? I'm a punchline for Arcane Carolinas.
I found it very amusing that someone I knew, the first comment they had when we posted about doing the Beaufort County government television channel, her first comment was, Blackbeard was, and I was just like,
Stop. You're going to hate that episode.
yeah, just stop there.
You're not going to like it.
Just stop there. According to a book by a guy named Michael Bricker, who is a native and resident of Winston-Salem, or at least was as of 2016 when the book came out, called Haunted Winston-Salem, which is in a series called Haunted America. It's also the series that had like Haunted Raleigh-Durham that we talked about from Arcana last year. That series has so many books in it that there are 3 from Winston-Salem. But one of them, really, he says in that book, and nowhere else that I could readily find, that while Washington was on that tour of the paper mill settlement and its waterworks, that the brother from the Moravian settlement who was guiding him, which history records there was a brother from the Moravian settlement guiding him, was growing increasingly nervous as they walked or as they rode, to the point that Washington, ever the pragmatist, said to him, look, like clearly there is something bothering you. What is wrong? And the guy said, well, we've kind of like strayed pretty far from the village, and we are now in the neck of the woods that we're all pretty sure is ruled by witches.
Ooh.
At which point, Washington is like, okay.
All them witches.
At that point, Washington is like, okay, I need deets. And the guy says there are 3 witches who live in the caves around the paper mill settlement.
Why is it always 3?
For complicated reasons that date back to Greek mythology.
Okay.
Always got the maiden, the mother, and the crown. And so at the time, the landscape around the paper mill settlement was all like ridges and caves and waterways, like streams and creeks and ravines and things like that. And so it was like this really uneven ground and a lot of caves. And some of those connected up with each other, and it was possible to go in there and get lost and never make your way back out.
North Carolina's got caves.
Yeah. So this guy tells Washington in the legend that there are 3 witches who live in that cave system, and the Moravians aren't supposed to consult the witches, but that they sometimes do. Everybody knows where they are, but nobody will admit to knowing where they are.
Sure, one of those things.
And
okay.
And he tells Washington, some people say that they're all old crones. Some people say that they're all young maidens who are temptresses. But I don't like riding around out here. At that point, Washington says, take me to the cave where the witches are.
Yes.
So the guy does because
G-dubs in the cave. G-dubs in the cave.
he's like terrified to take Washington to these caves, but also he's terrified to not do what Washington wants. So he takes Washington to these caves, and Washington and 2 of his aides go into the cave where the witches are supposed to be. And then he's gone for a long time, and he's gone for a longer time than that. And this Moravian brother starts to get worried about what's happened in there. And around the time he's about to turn around and go back to town and ask for help, Washington and his 2 aides emerge from the caves and won't say anything other than Washington turns to the Moravian brother and says, this was not my first encounter with the supernatural or unholy beings, but I hope it is my last. And then won't answer any questions about what happened in there. They go back to town. Washington hears another choral arrangement, has another fine dinner, meets...
Eat our cookies.
He like meets with the governor.
Whiskey too.
He meets with the governor. He goes to bed. He gets up at 4:00 the next morning and he leaves town. And in fact, goes and tours the site of the Guilford County Courthouse battle, and all kinds of stuff. A few days after this, a different group of travelers, because Salem was on its way to becoming a very popular stopping point for people going west. And in fact, after these events in later years, Washington identified Salem as what he thought should be one of the first post towns, which were towns where the federal government would say, this is a good place to go and get provisions if you're going west into the territories.
Oh, okay.
And in
That's
fact,
a good designation to have.
Yeah, and on Washington's recommendation, Thomas Jefferson designated Salem one of the first post towns.
That'd be a good episode of the show.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So these people like show up in Salem and they say, we've heard that there are witches around here and we want to get our fortunes read. And the Moravians in the paper mill settlement are all like, well, we don't truck with that ourselves.
Yeah.
But we're told that they live up there in a cave. And if you want to go do that, then you go do that. And that's not us. That's on you. At which point these people disappear for a few hours up in the hills. And then they come back and they say, well, we found a cave with a bunch of like stuff in it and 3 piles of ash, but no witches. At which point the Moravians say to each other, George Washington killed those witches and we don't know how, and we're never going to talk about it again.
He shot lasers out of his eyes.
I think this as a movie. George Washington versus the witches.
Yeah. And I actually titled my notes for this, George Washington Witchfinder.
But we have Abraham Lincoln Vampire.
Right. And I love that book. I actually think that's a great novel.
But there was nothing in Washington's diary about this.
Washington does not mention this in his diary now.
Some things are classified.
The Moravians also do not mention this in their diary.
I do have an addendum for this too.
Okay.
So, especially about Winston, it's not necessarily, it's tangentially related to the story.
Okay.
In terms of Salem's relationship with fortune tellers, 1938, you can actually find it on the city's website, city council meetings regarding fortune tellers, palmists, and clairvoyants. They were, it's March 25th, 1938. The aldermen agreed to refund $100 of the $200 license of a Madame Tuba if, quote, she and all of her associates would leave the city of Winston-Salem by 10 a.m. on Thursday, March 24th, 1938. This was followed by the enacting of an ordinance prohibiting the telling of fortunes, the practicing of palmistry, clairvoyance, or other crafts of similar kind of payment.
Huh.
Interesting.
It's interesting that you tell this story about people going into fortunes told by witches. And something that, I don't know what Madame Tuba did.
I'm going to note that name, though. We're going to find out what Madame Tuba did. Yeah.
That's a tuba noise.
Oh, my Lord.
That's a tuba noise.
So, like, my take on this is, and this kind of slots directly into the reasonableness, but, like, obviously this is made up.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not buying this.
Yeah. Bricker even says at the start of Haunted Winston-Salem that he doesn't claim any of these stories are true or in the factual sense. What he's telling are the stories that he was told as a child growing up in Winston-Salem in the 50s and 60s when he hung out in one of the old school grocery stores in his neighborhood in what's now downtown Winston-Salem. And old timers there told
And I was told
stories to
Optimus
the kids.
Prime passed the matrix of leadership to Rodimus. Doesn't mean I'm going to write it.
But like he says, I'm just telling you the stories that we were told as kids. And I'll buy that as a kid, somebody told him that story.
Yeah, totally.
You know, but I think clearly there's zero basis in fact.
Womp womp.
And I like the idea that it was maybe passed down through generations, maybe more than one generation. Maybe he was not the first generation of kid to hear that story from an old timer. Mm-hmm. But also I don't buy it because the Moravians had and have a unique divinatory tool that they used already. They did not need people in caves to
They
tell
read
them
the cookie crumbs?
They did not read the cookie crumbs. They had something they called the lots. It's basically a Magic 8 ball combined with pulling names out of a hat.
Okay.
They had a basket. It was a special basket dedicated to this purpose. And in it were little tubes that were also dedicated to this purpose. There were 3 of these little tubes. Mm-hmm. And into each you would put a piece
Always
of paper.
3.
Always 3. Always 3. and
I'm just saying.
No, yeah, it ties
here.
directly.
Uh-huh.
And one of the tubes had a piece of paper in it that said yes. One of the tubes had a piece of paper that said no. And one of the tubes had a piece of paper that was blank, which in the system used by the Moravians meant not now, but ask again later.
Interesting.
And so they would have somebody put the pieces of paper in the tube without seeing which ones they were. And then they would like reach in and rustle them around in the basket. And they would ask an important question as they were doing so. And then they would pull out a tube, look at the piece of paper in it. And this, they believed, was not witchcraft or fortune telling. They believed this was giving God a way to give them the answer.
All right. Interesting.
They didn't just use this as like a party trick. They used this to arrange marriages.
What?
There are examples in the Salem Diary of saying there's a guy who needs to get married. He is of age. We'd like to get him out of the single brother's house. Should we? And they would like stand over the lots basket and say, should we introduce him to Widow Johnson? And then they would fish around in there. And in the diary, it says, like, it said no to Widow Johnson. It said no to the daughter of this guy. It said maybe to this other person. It said yes to this other person. 3 months later, they were married. So, like, they would use this to settle important questions, but they didn't just use it to settle questions of love. They picked the location of the village using the lots. They identified like half a dozen places that they thought would be a good place to have a village.
You can see that I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with this. I'm just like, I don't like this anymore.
They picked like half a dozen places and they went through them in sort of their order of preference and said, God, should we build it here? No. Should we build it here? No. Like the fourth place on their list was when they got a yes from the lots, and that's where Salem is.
That's amazing. How did we miss that before?
Beats me.
I don't know. That's all right.
Imagine if Washington had like an interaction with these witches, that it would have been recorded because they had no problem recording other spooky.
Yeah,
exactly. That's a big part of it for me. They make no bones about like, we used the lots to settle this important question in the diary today. The town council met and we used the lots and we did this thing and that was our business. But interestingly, in the course of reading about this and trying to verify were there any other sources for this story, I discovered that Washington really was historically in the vicinity of a witch scare also.
Oh.
In 1787, in the middle of July, while the Constitutional Convention was meeting in Philadelphia, there was a witch scare in Philadelphia against a woman who had been accused of being a witch. And she was attacked once by a mob and did not die, but was very badly injured. And local newspapers decried this as, this is superstition only befitting the old world. And as our nation is meeting in Philadelphia, trying to establish a new government for itself,
we got bells to crack, people.
They were like, we should let go of all these superstitions the same way that we let go of the superstition of the divine right of kings. Yeah. There were like editorials about this in newspapers. Then a week later, the mob attacked her a second time and she was killed. And when that happened, though,
it's always sunny in Philadelphia.
Right? The legal authorities went after the people who did it. And the newspapers reported that they had been arrested and were going to be tried for murder, unlike every other witch scare that we have ever heard of happening in America.
Yeah.
And so it's really fascinating to me that, like, in that moment, there's a really interesting article about it in American Heritage Magazine from the 80s. And in it, the author points out this is one of the big hinge moments in the development of the world. Mm-hmm. At the time that she was being murdered, then a 13-minute walk away, I Google mapped it, a 13-minute walk away on 3 blocks, the Constitution was being signed.
That's crazy. That's a very strange correlation.
But that's my Winston-Salem story.
It's an amazing story. Thank you.
I said on Wednesday I had a banger of a story, and I was really pleased with it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, thank you. This was great. We did Reasonable Ghosts. We had a good story.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I actually had a second ghost story, but it's like we don't have time for it.
Yeah. Also, this was amazing.
But I was really pleased with this.
George Washington.
So in Old Salem, they used to have the village tavern, which they served food. Really great food. I thought it was very sad when they closed down. Like, they would tell stories with their food. Like, they had a dessert called a syllabub that was directly tied to when George was there.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
They dessert that either definitely was or probably was served to him. Mm-hmm. And so, like, that was their big thing, is serving food that might have or definitely was served to George.
That's cool.
Yeah. There's a marker, or was a marker, I don't know, on the side of the building that had been placed there in like the 1870s or something, about like, just so you know, George Washington was entertained here in 1780.
It's still there. The building's still there, and it's maintained by Old Salem.
Awesome.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind-the-scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com or visit my publisher, Falstaff Books, at falstaffbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.
You can edit that out if you want. I don't care.
But it was funny.
I had to do it.
It was funny. It was good.